Good afternoon. My name is Alyssa Relier, and I'm a board member and the volunteer coordinator of the Illinois Chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Thank you for joining us for today's presentation. The Illinois Chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention leads the nation in support of research, support of suicide prevention, outreach in the community, and philanthropic support. For additional information about our chapter, please visit www.afspil.org. While online, please bookmark these additional pages. AFSPILspeaker.org is where you can request free guest speakers and AFSP volunteers. Complete the form at afspmaterials.org to receive copies of AFSP materials and resources. Help us track your impact by completing afspilreach.org whenever you help us forward our mission in the community. Our materials, speakers, and events are all provided for free thanks to the generous support of the Out of the Darkness Community Walk and race team participants in Illinois. The Out of the Darkness Chicagoland Community Walk is the nation's largest suicide prevention walk. You can register and donate at www.chicagowalk.org. If you're not in Chicagoland, you can find the walk near you at walkinillinois.org. You might walk to support the cause, walk to be a part of the movement, walk to honor a loved one, walk to end the stigma, or walk to support our efforts. I walk because I lost my twin brother Andrew to suicide in 1997. And I think the community walks are a powerful instrument of change.
Suicide is a complex health issue. Despite its complexity, suicide is largely preventable. Just like there are warning signs and risk factors for other health crises like cardiac arrest, we can learn the warning signs and the risk factors to help us prevent people from dying by suicide. Today we'll cover some statistics to give you an idea of the scope of the problem of suicide. We'll go over some of the research findings, including the risks and protective factors that relate to suicide, and we'll talk about what works and what we can all do to prevent this leading cause of death. So let's start with some statistics that demonstrate the scope of the problem. Suicide is a global problem. Worldwide, over 800,000 people die by suicide every year, and according to the World Health Organization, that's a conservative number, since many countries do not report their suicide statistics accurately. That works out to a suicide occurring every 40 seconds worldwide. In the United States, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death. For adults ages 18 to 64, it is the 4th leading cause of death. Suicide takes more lives in the United States than homicide, war, and natural disasters combined. In 2013, which is the latest year in which we have data, 41,149 people died by suicide. For every death by suicide, it's estimated that 25 others attempt. That's about 1 million Americans each year who survive a suicide attempt. A recent study suggested that as many as 115 people are affected by a suicide death. And given the number of people who die each year by suicide, there are many more people who have been affected by a suicide death than previously thought. In addition to the devastating toll on families and communities, both socially and emotionally, there's a fiscal impact on our society as well. In 2013, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that suicide costs the United States $44 billion a year, due primarily to lost wages and productivity.
So let's move on to research. It's really only been in the last few decades that scientists have been studying suicide. Research is shedding light on many critical areas, and we still have a lot more to learn. Here are some key research findings. One of the big questions research explores is, why do people take their own lives? There is no single cause. Rather, there are multiple factors that come together to create suicide risk. Research has consistently shown that 9 out of 10 people who die by suicide have a mental health condition at the time of their death. It may or may not have been diagnosed or adequately treated, but mental health conditions are not the only thing that contribute to suicide. Mental health conditions cannot be the whole story because mental health conditions are common, and the vast majority of people who suffer from these illnesses do not die by suicide. There are many other factors that increase risk as well. We've learned that the brains of people who die by suicide differ from those who die from other causes in terms of structure and function, specifically in the areas related to stress response and impulse control. We've learned that most people who try to kill themselves are ambivalent about death. Part of them wants to live, part of them wants to die. We've learned about the perspective of a suicidal person, that a crisis point has been reached, that the pain seems unbearable, whether it's emotional pain, physical pain, or sometimes both. For a moment, I'd like you to think back to the most painful thing that you have ever experienced. Maybe it was childbirth, a broken bone, passing a kidney stone, or something else. At that moment, would you have been able to give someone clear and accurate directions to your house? Probably not. The unbearable pain makes ordinary thinking nearly impossible. For a suicidal person, thinking becomes irrational at that moment of crisis, a state of intense tunnel vision where other options seem unavailable. It's important to remember that suicidal feelings are often temporary. They can come on intensely and can sometimes pass in minutes or hours. Keeping people safe and making them feel supported can get them through those critical moments and save a life.
Looking to the future, research will help us find the best ways to fight suicide. Research is looking for biomarkers, for example, something testable in a blood sample that would help us to identify those at risk. A number of clinical treatments, like particular types of therapy, are effective for suicidal people, and more are needed to be developed and studied. Research can also help us identify the most effective community interventions at the public health level, such as policies that would reduce suicide rates. Research might also yield treatments like medications and therapy that could mitigate suicide risk in patients suffering from mental health conditions. Research has also helped us determine the factors that increase the risk for suicide. Risk factors are characteristics or conditions that increase the chance a person may take their life. Just like someone who is at risk for heart disease because of high blood pressure or a history of heart disease in the family, some people are at higher risk for suicide than others. The main risk factors can be grouped into three categories: health factors, including biological and psychological aspects of a person's health; historical factors, or things that happened in the person's or family's past history; and environmental factors, including societal and cultural factors, access to lethal means, as well as individual life events. These risk factors can collide at different times in life and increase a person's risk for suicidal behavior at a particular point in time. Let's look a little closer. Health factors include medical conditions, the most significant of which are mental health conditions. As we said before, 9 out of 10 people who die by suicide have a mental health problem actively contributing at the time of their death, sometimes multiple conditions. Depression is by far the most common mental health condition and the one is most commonly found as a risk factor for suicide. Bipolar disorder is also high risk, but the disorder is less common than depression. All of these conditions put a person at greater risk for suicide. So detecting the presence of a mental health condition is critically important. The best way to be sure is to seek a professional evaluation and effective treatment when you feel concerned or detect a possible change in your loved one's mental health or your mental health. Not only can you reduce the risk of suicide, but your overall health, well-being, and functioning can be improved. Mental health conditions are not the only health factors that are associated with suicide risk. Serious or chronic conditions, like diabetes, can increase risk, especially when the person also has mental health problems. Serious or chronic pain can increase risk, and serious head injuries can also increase suicide risk.
Environmental factors involve the circumstances of a person's life. Often, there are layers of a person's environment that can contribute to their overall level of risk. Let's look at a few of the most common. Access to lethal means, which includes a variety of things, such as firearms, drugs, a bridge, or a car. Contagion can include exposure to another person's suicide or to graphic or sensationalized accounts of suicide. Prolonged stress might include harassment, bullying, relationship problems, legal problems, or unemployment. Stressful life events include experiences like divorce, legal problems, or job loss. Historical factors include past events like a family history of suicide or a family history of mental health conditions, or past trauma such as sexual abuse or combat stress. And while most people who attempt suicide do not go on to die by suicide, previous suicide attempts also put a person at increased risk. Being abused as a child can also contribute to suicide risk. One problem with the public perception of suicide is that when someone dies by suicide, often the story only talks about the environmental factors. People see a life event like a breakup or bullying or a job loss, and then they see the person die by suicide, so they might assume the person killed themselves because of that stressful life event. But that's never the full story. What others don't know is that the person who died may have had genetic risks for suicide. Maybe they were suffering from depression and anxiety disorders, and their work life had become increasingly stressful. Their underlying depression and anxiety could have made the situation at work even worse, or the work stress could have made their depression worse. Perhaps they'd been drinking more than normal. The key is that all of these factors in combination could have contributed to the suicide. A life event can play a precipitating role for suicidal behavior, but without other underlying risk factors, life events aren't thought to cause suicide on their own.
Which brings us to prevention. There are also protective factors that lower a person's risk. If you are proactive about mental health and make an effort to get healthier, you protect yourself. Feeling connected to family and community support can protect against suicide. Problem-solving skills can also help. Life can get really tough, but being able to see a way through problems can be a protective factor. Cultural and religious beliefs that discourage suicidal behavior or create a strong sense of purpose can also be a protective factor. Getting effective treatment for depression or anxiety can prevent suicide. Mental health should be treated like any other aspect of a person's health. There are certain times when you get sick, and it's critical to seek a trained professional. One of the biggest challenges in fighting suicide is getting people to treat their illnesses. Of those suffering from a mental health condition, only 1 in 5 seeks treatment. We need a culture where everyone knows it's smart to take care of our mental health, if for no other reason than these are treatable or manageable illnesses. The most common forms of treatment are psychotherapies, like cognitive behavioral therapy or interpersonal therapy, medication like antidepressants or mood stabilizers. The most effective treatments tend to be a combination of the two, psychotherapy and medication. There are other forms of treatment available, and we hope to find more and better ways to treat illnesses like depression, anxiety, bipolar, and schizophrenia. The good news is that advocacy efforts are improving access to mental health services so that more people can get the treatment they need. The law now requires insurance plans to cover mental health services on par with physical health services. If we need mental health services, and 1 out of 4 of us will at some point, we should get treated and get our health back on track faster.
Proactive self-care strategies like good sleep hygiene, exercise, nutrition, and stress management can also play a critical role in protecting mental health and promoting resilience. Another way to prevent suicide is to limit access to lethal means. Installing an inexpensive carbon monoxide sensor that would automatically shut cars off if carbon monoxide levels reach unsafe levels would save thousands of lives. We've learned through research that installing barriers on bridges deters suicides, and in many studies, bridge barriers actually lowered the suicide rate for the entire region. Most people do not find other means, and the suicides just never occur. Restricting access to potentially lethal medications reduces suicides. It can be as simple as requiring lethal drugs to be sold in blister packaging. Firearm safety is important. In the United States, firearms are used in over half of all suicides. Making suicide prevention a part of gun safety education can reduce suicide rates. We also need to provide support for those touched by suicide. On average, a death by suicide profoundly impacts at least 42 other people. It's important that survivors have the support they need, both to heal and to reduce their own suicide risk. And since those with lived experience, those who have attempted suicide, or who experience suicidal thinking are at increased risk, we need to make sure they have the support they need too.
So what can you do to prevent suicide? Watch for the warning signs in yourself and others. Reach out to individuals in your life that you're concerned about, and reach out to others if you're struggling. Seek mental health services if you are depressed, or if your anxiety regularly interferes with your daily life, and encourage others to do the same. Suicide warning signs are typically displayed in 3 main ways: talk, behavior, and mood.
Many people who are suicidal talk about ending their lives either directly or indirectly. They might say it outright, or they might joke about it. Please take this seriously. They may say they have no reason to live, or that they are a burden to others. They may feel trapped, or they might talk about feeling overwhelmed or being in unbearable pain. People thinking about suicide can display certain behaviors, such as increased use of alcohol or drugs. They may have trouble sleeping. They may start acting more recklessly. They might withdraw from activities, especially from activities that they normally enjoy. They may isolate themselves from family and friends. They also might look for a way of killing themselves, searching online for methods or shopping for a firearm. They may also give away their possessions. People at risk for suicide can display any of the following moods: depression, apathy, rage, irritability, impulsivity, humiliation, anxiety. Moods one would expect of someone who feels overwhelmed and desperate. We all have ups and downs in our mood, but when you notice a change that seems uncharacteristic or concerning, speak to that person. Trust your gut. That's a lot of things to look for, so let's focus on changes in behavior and trusting your instincts. Assume you are the only one who's going to reach out. In too many instances, people talk about their concerns for someone amongst themselves, but hesitate to reach out to that person. So here's a rule of thumb. If you're wondering if someone is depressed or overly anxious, that's a sure sign that you should reach out. The same goes for you. If you're having suicidal thoughts, that's a sure sign that you need to seek help. If you've reached out before, reach out again. The first time the person may not be receptive. Keep trying. Because talk saves lives, it's a simple idea, but it works. And even if you're wrong about suicidal risk, they may still be in distress, and they may feel comforted and supported by knowing that you care and taking the time to listen. Or they may need someone to give them permission to seek help for their depression.
So, how do you reach out to someone? Talk to them in private. Listen to their story. Express concern and caring. Ask directly about suicide. Encourage them to seek mental health services. There are some less helpful things to avoid when talking with someone who may be suffering from depression or anxiety. Avoid minimizing their feelings. Those of us who have never experienced major depression literally cannot imagine what it feels like. Avoid trying to convince them life is worth living. If a person is nearing a crisis point, they are not thinking clearly. Philosophical debates about life being worth living tend not to be helpful. Avoid advice to fix it. If the person were having a heart attack, you wouldn't tell them to start exercising or to eat a healthier diet. If they are in crisis, what they need is to be heard and then led to help. Listen to their story and offer to help them find a mental health professional. If you think they might make an attempt on their life soon, stay with them. Do not leave them alone. Help them remove lethal means or to remove themselves from the potentially dangerous area. Escort them to mental health services or to an emergency room. Help them to call the Lifeline or call the Lifeline yourself, and a trained counselor will tell you what you should do to help the person in distress. Now would be a great time to take out your phones and add the Lifeline as a contact. Even if you never use it for yourself, you may need to call it to help a friend, and it's open 24/7, 365. If it's an emergency, such as a suicide attempt in progress, call 911. Together, we can create a culture that's smart about mental health, will save lives, and vastly improve the lives of many more. You can learn more at AFSPIL.org, ChicagoWalk.org, and WalkInIllinois.org. You can connect with us on Facebook at facebook.com/AFSPIL, or follow us on Twitter at AFSPIL and The Walk at AFSP Chicago. I lost my younger daughter, Ilana, 9.5 years ago to suicide. I wish that I had known then the signs and the warnings that you've learned about today. It might have made a difference. You can make a difference now. Thank you for listening.